And now it's a great honour to introduce the chairman of our party, Dr. James Lewthwaite. Thank you.
Right, well, what I took on board from Max Bégon-Lohr and Lawrence is that you can change your tactics. In fact, you should change your tactics and be flexible, but you must never, never drop your strategy. That is something which is, as Lawrence said, in your heart. You mustn't lose sight of the ultimate goal, and that is what the strategy is directed to. But a sensible political party is flexible, is manoeuvrable, and exploits the issues of the moment, but never loses sight of the ultimate goal. So what I want to look at is what's in the forefront of the news at present. Well, there's two main issues that are dominating the news. One is the whole question of small boat immigration, illegal immigrants. For a lot of nationalist parties, that's just about the most important thing, but I would suggest to you it's a red herring. Suella Braverman has shown that whether we leave whether we go for the Rwanda policy or not is totally irrelevant and immaterial, because Rishi Sunak has done his level best to castrate the whole thing from the start, so that whether we were challenged by the ECHR or not, it's not going to go anywhere. Why Rishi Sunak is saying the first plane is going to leave in spring, I don't know. He knows, you know, I know that no planes are going to take off in spring because the same legal challenges are going to come back to them. The current Home Secretary, who was previously the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, has announced that he will not under any circumstances revoke the Convention or leave the European Court of Human Rights. So you've got a Home Secretary who's dedicated to keeping the small boats arriving. But I suggest to you it's a total red herring, because the illegal migrants, so-called asylum seekers arriving in small boats, are a flea bite compared to the real problem, which is legal immigration. 600,000 people, a population the size of Bristol, is arriving every year quite legally. We were told that Australian rules would solve this. They're not. And that is entirely within the grasp of the government to stop. It could stop immigration of any kind tomorrow, and the asylum seeker issue would be seen for what it is, a red herring. But notice that in the media, there is no discussion of legal migration. That is what the small boat crisis, so-called, is for. It's to distract your attention from the real issue. It's to suggest that the whole problem is insoluble because of foreign courts, and if only we could get out the ECR, it could be solved. The real problem is the British government does not want to stop immigration. It's been suggested already that reform is just, it's not turning the deck of cards over, it's simply reshuffling the pack. It welcomes immigration. Mike reminded me that one of reform's people was on the TV the other night saying they welcomed immigration. Nigel Farage, in his time, welcomed immigration. What are these people for? If you ask a minister, they'll say it's to grow the economy. But the economy serves the people, not the people the economy. What those people are saying is we are just a workforce. And when a previous speaker, I think it was Matt Godden, said that they are an elite, they're speaking as an elite. They see the rest of us as the humble workforce, which can be grown or diminished as much as they like to create output. But they, of course, are above and beyond being the rabble, as Adrian has said. They are the elite and they are controlling the whole works. And we are the workforce which are slaving away for their benefit. It couldn't be clearer that they simply see the nation as a means to serve their end. They don't think of us as the British people for whom the economy is a means to an end. It should be there, as I think Andrew once said, it's there to enable every person in this country to have a reasonable standard of living. It need be no bigger than that. We're not competing for size of GDP with other nations as a sort of egg and spoon race. We are only interested in an economy that serves a finite group of people, the indigenous British community. We don't need to hire mercenaries from abroad to work for us, because that doesn't raise the profitability per head. It might make the economy bigger, but it won't make anybody in this room any wealthier or any better provided with social services or an employment benefit or anything else, because all it will do is increase the size of the workforce. And at the same time, it'll keep wages down, because there will always be more supply than there is demand, and therefore the worker is always going to be told, if you don't like the terms and conditions, you can go, because we've got an Indian waiting in the wings to replace you. When I guarded a particular computer company back in something like 2000 and so on, I wondered why there were so many Indian graduates there. I've told this story before, but it's still true. They were hired because they were hired at Indian wages within the company, so it counted not as immigration at all, but as a company personnel transfer. But they were paid Indian wages, so I said, well, wait a minute, I can see how that's a benefit to GE Capital. They pay Indian wages for work in a Western country, but how do the Indians survive in our economy? Oh, they get top-ups. As soon as they arrive in this country, GE Capital gives them a form to fill in. They get tax credits to make their wages up to that of the English worker they're replacing. So we are busy subsidising the profits of GE Capital. That is not being challenged anywhere in the media or by any political party. The other big crisis is Gaza, and what that tells us is that we're a divided country with a bent police force. But you knew that already. So if you stand back and look at it, what strikes me is, when I was a schoolboy of about 15 and I heard Enoch Powell's speech and I thought about it, I'd only been in the country for 2/3 of my life. The first third was spent in India, where I was born and raised in Bombay for a bit, by a father who'd been in the British Indian Army during the war, and a mother who was struggling to cope with a lot of fractious servants who were divided by race and religion. So when I heard Enoch Powell speak, I thought, wait a minute, he's phrasing it wrongly. He's seeing it as a problem between whites and blacks. Well, it'll probably end up like that, but that's not how it's going to begin. Because what we're doing at present, back in 1968, the immigration consists of people who cannot stand the sight of each other. We're importing other people's civil wars. How long will this go on? Well, we saw the beginnings of that in the protests outside the Cenotaph and up and down Whitehall. And the worst part of it was watching white people. There will be the usual suspects. There'll be liberal, left-wing, Marxist-influenced intellectuals with a university background marching around proudly, holding Palestinian flags. Somebody else's war. And yet, clearly, that was the most important issue in the world for them. Not British working-class boys being at the back of the queue for universities. Somebody else's war was dominating the headlines. A quarter of the Labour Party MPs, either of Muslim extraction or significantly of non-Muslim extraction, indigenous British MPs who represented largely Muslim constituencies, were crossing the line. They were challenging the Labour Party leadership. I have no doubt that in the long run there will be a Muslim Party of Britain. Just a question of time. And then the Labour Party will be in an awkward position, because it's going to have to look at its white working class again and think, oh, we have to go back to these people, cap in hand, asking for their votes, having betrayed them for the last 50 years. Perhaps they won't be welcoming us as the party of Keir Hardie. Perhaps they'll vote Tory or vote nothing or stay at home. Either way, it's a long way from what my schoolmasters were telling me when I was 15. When I was already well known for having opinions about immigration, they just said, Lewthwaite, you don't understand. Within a generation, these people are just going to be brown Englishmen. They'll be wearing our clothes, eating our food, celebrating Christmas and not Diwali or Eid. They'll be just brown Englishmen. Well, if you look around the streets of Bradford, you don't see a lot of brown Englishmen. You do see people wearing their pyjamas in daytime and getting more ethnic by the minute. When I arrived in Bradford from Bristol in 1983, you didn't see a single woman wearing a full burqa. Now you see them on every street corner with their little slits for the eyes to come through, in their burqas, and the gentlemen in their pyjamas. It's become more Muslim, not less. And that's a common phenomenon among expatriate communities. When Englishmen live in other parts of the world, they become more English, not less English. They celebrate their festivals with more gusto because they feel surrounded by strangers. Well, these people feel surrounded by strangers, even when it's 99% Pakistani, as in Manningham or Frizinghall. Essentially, they're putting up walls against the rest of us by their costumes, by the fact they speak Urdu better than they speak English, even though they've been to a British school for the whole of their primary and secondary schooling. They still speak broken English and with an accent, etc., etc., and among themselves they speak Urdu. So it's not the world which we were told was going to come into place. When you look at what's going on around you, it's exactly the opposite of what the politicians of the 1960s wanted with their multicultural, multiracial paradise that was going to happen, and we were all going to live happily with each other in peace. That's precisely what nationalists said would not happen, and we've been proved right. But do you get any recognition for that? No single politician will step forward and say, we got it wrong. And they're never going to. So who is benefiting from all this? Apparently, we would think, the left. Except the left are actually useful idiots in the hands of the real right, the global capitalists. Why? Because although the left have always welcomed social chaos because they think they can slip through a communist revolution while the society is broken up, the right welcomes it even more. They want those atomized individuals who exist solely to go to their supermarkets and buy their overpriced food, etc., etc. I won't give the whole story, but you know what I mean. They want the workforce. They want the puppets that are merely consumers and producers but have no political impact whatsoever, because the elite, the people that run the global capitalists, remember Rishi Sunak had his green card in his pocket, ready to rejoin Goldman Sachs in California any time, even when he was going to be Prime Minister of Great Britain, having backstabbed Boris Johnson, because at the end of the day, Great Britain, to Rishi Sunak and a lot of the elite, is just landing strip one. It's just a place they fly into and out of because the globe is their oyster. They're just going to go from one elite location to another depending on which corporation they're working for at the time or which branch of which corporation. We are just the workforce slaving away for their benefits. They can climb into another airplane, and what they assume is that that airport is always going to be surrounded by a passive bunch of hobbits just doing what they're told and not interfering. But what they are actually creating is a Hobbesian universe of war between everyone and everyone else. They welcome that at one level because it keeps us divided and passive and helpless and apathetic. But at the other level, they don't seem to perceive that that world is going to be unlivable even for themselves, even in their gated communities and behind their barbed wire fences and the rest of it, even with a subservient police force that will always turn out to protect them but never turn out to protect us. You only have to look at police stations. The police station in Bradford, there used to be several police stations scattered all over Bradford. They've all retreated into one central fortress, which is accessible by road, which they clearly intended to defend themselves in the event of a riot and leave the rest of us to our fate. As Matt Gooden said, the police are solely there for the protection of the elite. So if you stand back and ask who is really benefiting, it's the global corporations and the elite who work for them. The left are simply a tool, an instrument in the hands of the right. But they understand well enough that it's in their interest to break up families, to lecture children at the age of 4 about things they can't possibly comprehend, but it's got a goal. It's to break up every single organ of society that has kept society together. Society was once defined as the little platoons, all acting together. All the overlapping parts of the community which built up a social fabric that was recognisable. Their aim is to produce, as somebody has already said, atomized individuals who are totally alienated because they're no threat to the system. They will never combine and fight. Victor Jara famously said, "Un pueblo unido más será vencido." Well, that's what they're afraid of, a united people that can stand up to them. So they're going to break that people down into isolated individuals, toying away on their internet computers in their isolated bed and breakfasts or their bed sitters. No threat to them. So you might say, well, doesn't politics exist to provide a channel for our discontent? Well, let's look at the range of them. The Tories, Rishi Sunak has been commented upon by a political commentator I was watching. He represents the left third of the Tory party at best. They're referred to by this commentator as Noos. Tories in name only. They're the left-wing third of the Tories that could defect to the Liberal Democrats without changing their policies at all. He's cast adrift the Brexiteers and the right and anything to do with the Red Wall. He's basically looking to people who could be just as happy voting Lib Dem in blue wall seats in the southeast, because that's all he expects to win. He knows his game is up, but he doesn't care because he's off to Goldman Sachs as soon as he possibly can. And as for the Labour Party voters who defected to the Tories because of Bojo's words to them, well, they're going to be cast adrift. The Labour Party is clearly fracturing between the ones that are sticking with Keith Starmer and the ones who are going to go Muslim, either because they are Muslim or because they represent Muslim communities, which tells you where their loyalties are. Their loyalties are to themselves. They want to get re-elected. They don't care if in doing so they sell out the indigenous British population, because it doesn't matter to them. As long as they get elected somehow by somebody, they're quite happy with that. So much for the Jess Phillips and the Angela Rayners and the rest of them with their moral principles. They haven't got any. Waiting in the wings, you have the Ninos, or Niños, as we might say, if you speak enough Spanish. You've got the nationalists in name only, and that's, of course, the civic nationalists, who welcome immigration, who believe that anybody can be British if they've got the appropriate piece of paper. Well, we don't have anything very much to say to them, except they're shooting themselves in the head by adopting precisely the wrong strategy for ever getting anywhere in politics, which leads you to suspect they're nothing but a safety valve. Richard Tice, you can't wedge off the screens of GB News no matter how hard you try. He's on every day, and every commentator on that programme, which is the only one I watch now, is busy pushing reform. Reform are going to get nowhere. They threaten to stand a candidate in every constituency in Britain. What sort of strategy is that? It's mindless. It's the same strategy that Farage forced on my good friend, the head of the UKIP party in Bradford. I said, Jason, why are you standing in every ward in Bradford, including the 99% Pakistani ones, when you should be concentrating your forces in, say, Bradford South, which is largely white, where you and the Tories between you outnumber Labour, but Labour keep being elected because you can't do a deal with the Tories? He said, I have my orders. Farage has decreed that we stand a candidate in every ward in Bradford, and I've got to do as I'm told, or I'm threatened with a sack. I said, but that is electorally mindless. You need to concentrate on 2 or 3, get your councillors in, and then spread outwards from that base. That is the way forward. You just need one breakthrough. To do that, you should put all your resources behind 1 or 2 candidates in highly winnable wards. Yeah, but I've got my orders. Well, apparently Richard Tice has given his orders, and they're the same. We're going to stand everywhere, which means, as Napoleon famously observed, he who defend everything defends nothing. They're not going to win anywhere. What is the point of entering an electoral campaign when you know in advance that you're not going to get a single MP elected? Because what you need to do is concentrate on the 5 or 6 winnable constituencies. If you stand in every constituency, you're going to get nothing, because under the first past the post system, getting 30% or whatever it is neither here nor there. You could get 30% everywhere and not get a single representative into Parliament. So that's a strategy which is doomed to failure. Now, either Richard Tice, therefore, is extremely stupid, or he's nothing more than a distraction. It's just a safety valve so that people who feel dissatisfied with the Tories will vote for something, pat themselves on the back, I did vote this time around, but it's a meaningless vote because Richard Tice doesn't intend to get into Parliament. He's going to be on the screens of GB News forever, simply as a whining dog. And then you've got us. If everything I've said previously is true, then we're the only sensible party to vote for. We're surrounded by other signs of life in the nationalist movement, but most of them are largely discreditable. We don't want to have anything to do with the thugs that turned up at the Cenotaph. Even if they got beaten over the head by the police unjustifiably, they're not a public image. They're not an optic we want to pursue. Lawrence Ruston made that point, I think, very clearly, and also the whole point of being able to disavow ourselves of disreputable people is we don't want to go down that route. We have 2 routes. One is the electoral ladder, which Steve Smith pioneered in the East End, which is that we try from parish and town council to move on to district council when we can. We may stand 2 MPs. It's something we will doubtless discuss in the further business, because a couple of candidates have come forward. We have to be reconciled to the fact we will probably lose our deposits, but on the other hand, we will make ourselves a certain amount of publicity. We've got finances in the bank. We can do that. We would get a free mail drop. We welcome your opinions as to whether, at this stage of the game, it's worth standing 2 candidates at that level. And then we have the question of legality. Adrian has touched upon that, in that we have no community representation. But it's more than that. We have missed so many opportunities, going back to the Griffin years, to challenge the establishment through the legal route. Now, look at the immigration question, the small boats. Every time somebody is threatened with deportation, the usual suspects of the left challenge them in the courts, and very often win. Every time the government suggests any amendment to the immigration, it's challenged in the courts. And 50% of the time, at least, they win. If they lose, then they push it on to the next court. And they've gone to the Supreme Court and got what they wanted. Why haven't we been doing the same for at least 20 years? I've said this before, but my colleague, Arthur Redfern, was sacked from West Yorkshire Transport. He defended himself. Griffin promised him money he never received. Collections were made for Arthur. They never reached him. He had to mortgage his bungalow. He won the case in the end that he could not be sacked from West Yorkshire Transport because it contravened Acts 10 and 11 of the Human Rights Act, which is incorporated into British law. How many people knew that? Because it was never publicised by Griffin. Not having paid for Arthur's defence, Griffin did nothing to exploit that. He should have challenged the Association of Police Officers when they said no serving policeman can be a member of the BNP. On what basis? They had no legal justification whatsoever. It was their opinion. The opinion of the Association of Chief Police Officers is no more valid as an opinion than your opinion or my opinion. It has no status in law. So why didn't he challenge it and say, this is illegal and we're going to take you to court over it? Because he wasn't that sort of a nationalist. He just played along with nationalism, but if he'd really had his heart in it and his mind in it, and remember that Griffin was half-trained as a lawyer at Downing College, Cambridge, he could have challenged them through the courts. When we have enough money, we must challenge them in the courts. Every single time they try to stop us from holding down our jobs, we must say, the Human Rights Act protects you, but somebody's got to say that to the court. It won't do it of itself. Employers will try to sack people. They'll be put under pressure to do so. But it's up to this nationalist party, at least, not to go down the route of passivity and to say every single case we will pick up. Better still, we will create a case that is in our favour. Good generalship says you don't wait for the enemy to attack you on ground not of your choosing. You set up a case in which the terrain favours you, the weather favours you, the manpower favours you, you've got a good case, and then you spring it on the opposition. That means we look out for somebody who is young, personable, articulate, and is threatened with being sacked or is being threatened with not being allowed to go for a career of his choice because he's a member of the British Democrats. And then we have to have the advice of somebody like Adrian Davis, and we make sure we catch the establishment in a trap. Instead of them trapping us, we have to go out aggressively and trap them into a situation they don't foresee, wait for the media to bite on the bait, and catch the establishment. Of course, they will escalate it to a higher court and keep trying till they win. But how much publicity do you need? How many breakthroughs do you need? The Isle of Dogs was one breakthrough at the electoral level. But what if we had a breakthrough at the legal level and the government was caught out doing something that it can't defend in law? That would ring around the world. That would be on every newscast all over the world. British government caught out with its pants down its ankles over a legal issue which they were fully aware they were not entitled to press. But they've done so. They're in the wrong. They're going to try and wriggle free. Ministers will be deployed to explain it away. But a legal challenge has been thrown down and the government is now in the wrong. That is the sort of publicity that will propel us forwards, because you're not going to see that coming from Britain first. You wouldn't have seen it coming from your Britain. It's something which we've got the intellectual calibre to do, because people like Andrew Bronze And people like Adrian Davis can think this one through, and we can catch the government in a trap it can't escape from. And we've got those rulings in the background. I don't know if there's any mechanism by which they fall out of use, if there's a sunset clause or whatever, but if not, then those are still valid. And it's our job to publicise them and say, if your employer threatens you with sacking, or if he threatens you with not being hired, come to us, and we will see if your case can be defended in law, and we will do that. And we will raise the funds, if necessary, by crowdfunding to do it. Because if we get one legal breakthrough, then we will have done something which British nationalism has not done in 50 years, but should have been doing all the time. The left have been doing it, and we should learn from their success, that if you challenge the government, you can win, and they are then stymied. Thank you very much for your time. I think that's everything I wanted to say.
It was a wonderful speech from Jim, and as I said, not just concentrating on the electoral aspect, but also the legal side and different areas of life where you can actually sort of make a difference and get a small victory over the establishment. Quite surprising. That was an excellent speech, Jim.